Hi, everyone. Welcome to the new installment of our discussion series here in the AI Media and Democracy Lab at the University of Amsterdam. My name is Thomas Dotz, and I'm going to be moderating the conversation today about how journalists are using AI in the newsroom. We have an amazing panelists today. I'm going to introduce them today. I'm not going to take a lot of time because we really want to hear from them, from their experiences, and from the research. So first we have Professor Amina Kothari. She's the director of the Harrington School of Communication and Media and a professor in journalism. Before joining the University of Rhode Island, she was an associate professor of communication and the graduate program director of communication in the School of Communication at Rochester Institute of Technology. So thank you very much joining us all the way from Rhode Island. Now it's early in the morning, but I hope we're going to make it worth. Then we have also Florencia Goello. She is a new media researcher and training manager at La Nación in Argentina. She was also a John S. Knight journalism. She was also, a John S. Knight journalism fellow at the University of Stanford. And recently, perhaps she can tell us a little more, they have been awarded the Sigma Award for journalism, sharing it with other journalistic projects like ProPublica. And finally, but not least, we also have Patricia Ventura. She's a journalist and PhD student of media communication and culture at the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona, whose thesis on ethics, artificial intelligence, and communication analysis analyzes the digital media ecosystem from a critical perspective. So we have an amazing panel for you today. We're really excited to hear your stories. So let's jump right in. So the temptation of using AI in the newsroom is big, either to unveil hidden patterns or analyzing large volumes of data. More newsrooms across the world are kind of tempting of using this type of technologies. So the first question is going to be, Patricia, for you, if you can help me. How are you seeing newsrooms using AI right now? What is different than it was before? In what moment of the journalistic process do you see, based on your report, that the use of AI is more prominent?
Yes, thank you, Thomas. First of all, thank you to the AI Media and Democracy Lab for inviting me here to this conversation. So yes, the AI is changing the routines in media. Clearly, it's creating a work of a more technical nature, such as the creation of structures for automated content, such as the mastery of database management. For sure, Florencia can tell a lot about this. Or filtering of possible newsworthy topics reported from those news gathering tools. In addition, unlike the past, routines are changing because teams are changing. They tend to hybridize with more technical profiles, such as engineers. In the future, it's a little difficult talking about the future, but there's a kind of fear that in our research we felt from the sector, in which AI could imply a loss of quality or dehumanization, and in fact it has this potential. But I'm optimistic, and I think that this is not going to happen. And instead, this human component, it has sense to think that this human component will be one of the factors that will differentiate the product, the journalistic product. In our report, there's a sentence that said by one of the academics that participate in it, Professor Charlie Beckett, for sure you know him, that says if a machine can do basic journalism, then anyone with a machine can do that journalism. So changes in routines will happen, but tech should not change the meaning of what journalism is.
Absolutely. Flor, if I can throw the question to you, the same. You were talking before a little bit about some of the projects that precisely allows you I mean, you have to work with different type of professionals now, right? In some of the projects that you were describing. Can you tell us a little bit more of the projects that you're developing now, and if relates a little bit with what Patricia was talking about?
Yes, we published music songs analysis with NLP that was like data entertainment, but we are learning by doing without deadlines. Then we can analyze with these tools a massive leak of information for politic corruption. No, so we are still exploring, and we also used computer vision to analyze elections documentation.
Mm-hmm.
To try to detect if in a form there are missing boxes that need very important information. And so those are the ones that we have published, and we have teamed with a consultant in computer vision because we don't still have the skills in our team. But we, like with collaboration with them, we are like learning by doing the process, no? So we are using it more for processing of a great amount of information, more than other uses that AI can give to a newsroom, no?
Yeah.
Like it could be news gathering or reaching new audiences. So I don't know if I have answered all of the questions, but this is the ones that we have published, and definitely we don't even have the whole skills in our team, and we are partnering with a consultant, but our team is learning how to deal with this stuff. Or it's a long learning curve, no?
I think what is amazing from one of your projects is that the same technology that you used before to analyze trap songs, right? Was about trap. To analyze trap songs, later you can modify the algorithm a little bit and use that to analyze political corruption as well.
Yeah, that's our hope. No, that we learn how to deal with it, and then in an emergency and a deadline, we know which libraries work and with code we could use, and where we have to tweak something. So we are in an exploring phase. Yeah.
That is super interesting. But in the conversation about how newsrooms start adapting AI technologies, it feels to me there are some elements that we don't include, or we don't pay necessarily attention. One of them that is mentioned in Patricia's report, it's about how most of these systems are kind of designed to be used in English, right, to English language. So I want to throw the question here to Amina, because you, in one of your recent publications, you have mapped out kind of the development of AI inside newsrooms in the African continent, right? And I want to see how is it developing, first of all, and what are the main kind of obstacles that are facing today, particularly, could it be language, could it be set of skills? Yeah, so please.
So good morning or good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to this important and timely session. So first, I think we need to differentiate between where the AI work is happening. And so some of my research has been interviewing journalists in the newsrooms in the US, and I found that it's mostly metropolitan national organizations that are doing more sort of in-depth work with AI. When looking at African countries, a similar trend is visible. It's more developed countries in some parts of Africa. So for example, South Africa, there is more work being done with AI. And what they are doing is it's actually bureaus of international organizations that are implementing the tools that they developed for English language. So some of it is working because it's template driven. So if you are auto-generating financial news and sports media related stories, that's easy to transport the machine learning code that you use to train, the algorithm to create that. But I think the issue comes when you are looking at accountability tools. I think what Flo mentioned, we're trying to identify bias. There are a lot of differences and nuances in languages. And in Africa, for instance, there are so many languages and variations of that. So it would be a challenge to take something that was developed in Western countries and predominantly in English to try and even apply it in African context, because just how language is used and the type of stories that are done is an issue. But I think a bigger issue that is happening is that there isn't the infrastructure or the technology in many countries to even try and implement this. So there is what's happening with the AI technology and its spread in many parts of the world is African countries, unfortunately, are further being left behind. So one, there is the language issue, but also the capacity and the resources to even bring it in. So that's a bigger issue that we are seeing that I've also found in my research.
This necessarily, thank you very much. This necessarily opened the question to wonder if perhaps, because I know Flor was mentioning before we started this meeting about how the team in La Nación is, well, teaming up with or partnering with other organizations. So, I mean, I'm going back to you with, do you think that perhaps one of the solutions to kind of solve this issue, it will be partnering with either some platforms or some other type of organizations that might be able to assist in filling this gap that exists in both skills and infrastructures?
Yes,
The
actually,
question is,
yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand if the question was for me. I hope it's for you, I mean.
Okay. But actually, you can answer that too, because I think the AI journalism initiative that's from London School of Economics, I think the last year's group that they brought in, they actually focus on African journalists. I was very encouraged to see that the capacity that's been built in European countries, they are bringing in journalists from African countries and having them work in collaboration and learn from each other. So I think that's one way of doing it. I also know that Google has been investing in some countries, and so they are collaborating, but then when you have Google sort of being part of that, there are other issues that come with it. Yes. So I think it's more organic if it's an educational institution or a newsroom that actually knows how to create AI tools that are for the purpose of journalism rather than generic tools. So there is some work being done.
Yeah, Flor, so I'm going back to you. What is the importance that you see working every day in the newsroom of partnering with these either platforms or companies in order to develop these tools?
I prefer to partner with other newsrooms than the platforms. Like learn the skills together and then compete for the stories, because it's a lot of resources of time to learn. Like with the platforms, we have funding from Google for this diversity headline checker. And we know that we are using a platform money for something that it wouldn't be allowed for us to work in the daily basis in the newsroom. No? So we are taking that money for this that we wouldn't have the opportunity and time to work with that. The LSE project that we have partnered twice, 2 years in a row, it has had funding from Google, but not for the newsrooms, maybe for police, LSE. And so yes, it's like I always have like mixed feelings, and I would love if we have more like different sponsors for one project, not only to rely on one platform to support this. So I don't know if you were going to that direction with your question.
Absolutely, no, sorry. Yeah,
so that's what I have to answer. I would love like to not depend on that money to do research. And if we have to use that, to have a clear mind why we are using it and for what purpose. And it would be like a client putting advertising in La Nación, no? Like, should we criticize this bank that has a whole page in the Sunday? No, so those are questions around, and I like what we are partnering for these projects that I pasted in the chat. Was only with a data consultant that is not belonging to a platform, and the other one with a software factory or consultant in Argentina. So the ones that we published as a project, no?
I mean, this is super interesting. I can already feel the questions coming from this side of the room eventually when we reach the Q&A. But Patricia, in your report, you mentioned that more and more newsrooms are at least thinking of, if not already implementing AI technologies in their reporting. How do you think that both this relationship with platforms, perhaps, or just the use of these technologies is changing in any way values? We know that practices, yes, but the values and ideas of how the journalistic work should be done.
Yeah, those technologies are impacting clearly in journalistic values, if this is what you're asking. And we define journalistic values as truth, fairness, freedom, and responsibility. And we found them from a previous research done by PhD Salvador Alcius, who analyzed codes of ethics, worldwide codes of ethics, and those he found those were the main principles in our sector. So, in fact, part of our methodology consisted in contrasting those main principles with those new practices and tools with AI, and we found that almost all of them, they have the potential to conflict with those values. It depends, always it depends on how you use them. For example, in personalization, if you use it in a way, for example, if you optimize a news recommender just for like spreading or for page views, for clicks, then those pieces of content that they don't used to have many clicks, such as, or if they represent minority groups, if they don't have views, then this use of personalization would conflict with this fairness principle, no? So this is the kind of things that we analyze, and we go deeper for the people that's interested. I'm not going to talk very much about this, but it's just an example of how like a new practice or a new tool could conflict with one of those values. And furthermore, there are new values that are emerging with AI technologies, which are clearly transparency and privacy. Transparency is one of the main principles of cyber ethics, technoethics. This is ethics from the computational sciences discipline. Transparency emerges all the time, constantly in our research. Transparency is needed for protecting us journalists and audiences from potential biases or errors in the outputs of the algorithms. And it emerged, for example, in communicating clearly when a content has been automated, for example, labeling it, or for example, in communicating in a very clear and short and simple way, how do we use personal data, for example. And regarding this, privacy is the other value, the other principle that takes on another meaning, because both transparency and privacy were already in our codes of ethics with other meanings, no? Privacy takes on this new meaning and becomes more relevant too, because logically, as more automation, more data we have to use, more personal data. And in this context, in this moment in which proliferate those unethical uses, this data extractivism from platforms or other like companies, institutions, we think journalism must take a stand. And if journalism has to watch those unethical uses of personal data, journalism has to be in a position to use this personal data, to manage this personal data in an exemplary way, no? And this means adjusting to, here in Europe, to GDPR.
Yeah, I mean, that is an amazing bridge for my next question, because it was, so what about the audience, right? What about the audience that experience or if they know at all that these technologies are being used to direct news to them? And I know, Flor, that you have used some of these technologies, I'm thinking in the Data Boss project, to actually incorporate the audience into the production of news. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, I'm a huge fan of crowdsourcing from a long time, and we have developed a tool with the help of Knight Foundation and Open News, and then Civicus Alliance, that was a online platform to help us open data. It could be audios, it could be PDFs. And we have used that platform previously on elections, where volunteers from transparency NGOs and universities of political science, of journalism students and professors help us revise documents and put information in a Google form, like a kind of Google Forms, so we could digitize and create a database together. It had like validations steps. And this year, we said, are we going to use this tool that is called Voz Data for the elections forms that are completed by the public servants or citizens that are in each election station, receiving the votes from the citizens and putting them in a box and then counting it. And then I say, okay, why don't we try to use computer vision to analyze those documents that we previously analyzed with our own eyes, and we could only revise 1,600, like 16,000. Why don't we try computer vision to revise 100,000 of the documents and use human eyes to check what the algorithm has classified as information that should be revised with any. And so we did that with the same people that has been working with us in different projects, like analyzing Senate expenses, phone interceptions after a terrorist attack, or elections documents. We invite them and tell them, hey, we have used an algorithm that classified all this pile of documents, and they have said that these have incomplete information. For example, a total of votes, or if there is a signature of the head of a polling station or the voting station, and what do you see, and help us validate the algorithm decision. And it was super useful because they have discovered that some of the forms were scanned upside down. So while the software was ready to put an eye to the right top to find an information, actually was on the other side. So for the primaries, they detected that, and for the general election, we updated the software, say, hey, if you can read a code bar here, that all this information has a coded bar upside, you go and look to the top right. But if you don't find the code bar in the top and you find it at the down, you should look at the down left to look for the information. So we didn't find any fraud, any significant outlier in the results, but it was a useful civic project, and it's a good information for authorities of the both different political parties that we are watching with artificial artificial intelligence now. So where we can find if there is some maneuver to try to change the result in a voting station, no?
Professor, sorry, I mean, you asked me not to call you professor. Not only in the African continent, but also from your experience in the US, could involving the audience in the ways that both Patricia and Flora are talking about kind of assist media in the development of perhaps infrastructures or skills that involve the audience in solving both shortcomings in the skills and infrastructures that perhaps media are dealing with. So what role should the audience play regarding these technologies and the way that journalists are working here?
That's an excellent question. So I think there is quite a bit of work actually being done in the US, again, at the national organization. And I think Flora actually has worked with ProPublica. You know, ProPublica focuses on investigative journalism. They have a lot of computational journalists working for them. So they use a lot of AI tools. So I think because they have trained professionals, they are very careful about the ethical guidelines, how they use the information, and how they report and provide the methodology as well. So I think ProPublica, the Center for Public Integrity, I think Washington Post has done a good job as well when they have sort of crowdsourced some of the information, whether it's for fact checking or even collecting data. But I think that's a good way of collaborating with the audience. I've also done experiments while I was at RIT to test the GPT-2 and GPT-3 model of AI, OpenAI model. And what we found was people not only struggled to differentiate between machine generated and journalist written stories, but many of the people who participate, they did not even know that there quite a bit of work is being done using AI tools. So there's a lot of financial news, sports news, from wire services, they are all auto-generated. There's no longer a human writing that. So I think there is a lack of public education about how AI is being used. And that worries me a little bit because as we think about fear about disinformation, and it's so easy to generate content, and having tested GPT-3 actually recently last year, I myself struggled to differentiate between it's that good, that this is a story that was written by a journalist, and this is a story that's really generated from information that's not it's real, but it is taken from different places. So I think part of the conversation is I think about my own work that yes, AI technologies are in newsrooms. They are going to be brought into more newsrooms. It makes sense for efficiency purposes, but what are the implications for trust? There's already a lack of trust, at least in the US, from the public side about journalism. So when people start doubting whether this is a real story, what is the collaboration between a human and a machine, we need more education, I think, of the public. And I think more transparency. So I think Patricia, she brought up a good point about, the new news values and journalistic values, right? Thinking about privacy and transparency. But I think unless it has changed recently, many of the stories that are machine generated now, it does not indicate that. So either there's no byline, but there's no way indicating that this is no longer written by a human. And I think that's a conscious choice, right? Because it raises more questions, but how do we change that public's understanding so we realize that this is actually the norm, this has been happening for a while, and what are the implications? Because there are implications, as Patricia mentioned, and and I think there are some really good uses, but also there is a potential to manipulate and clear more, create more filter bubbles, because when you are personalizing content, you might just be getting more of the same, and further, minority voices are going to get lost more. Voices that are not online will not get covered. So I think there are still a lot of implications that we've been struggling with journalism historically, and now AI tools that don't necessarily help me with that either.
I mean, that's amazing. That was going to be also my follow-up. So where does this responsibility to educate the audience rely on, right? Is it from the public system? Is it from, is it a legal question, or should be a journalistic question? Should media educate their audiences in the technologies that they're using to report the news?
I would say the journalists need to do it. So I think some news organizations are doing it by when you provide the methodology. So if you are using, AI tool, like explain, how this is a collaboration between an algorithm and human, and what part was actually done through machine learning, because then people can decide if they're going to trust the story or they have issues with that. So I think just making that a normal part of reporting, people will start to see it.
Yeah. So we're running out of time for the first section of this part of this discussion series. So what I'm going to do is the unavoidable question of what's the future of AI in the newsroom. So I'm going to ask each one of you. I'm sorry, Natalie's already laughing at me. I'm going to ask each one of you, what do you see for the future, right? How is this going to be different? How perhaps the relationship with the audience? What are you expecting that it's going to happen? And then I'm going to stop the recording and I'm going to open the floor for the audience, because I'm sure there's a million questions here. So, I mean, if I can start with you, and then I'll
Sure. So since I started with more of a pessimistic view about future of journalism in Africa with AI, I want to end with a more positive note, because I think there are the younger generation is interested. They're learning coding. There are people who are following the changes in technology. So I think the potential for African journalists and technologists to develop a version of AI tools for journalism that is actually embedded in African values, African ethics, and what would make sense that can be customized for other countries. So it's an opportunity rather than just taking what comes from somewhere else and trying to fit in a model. So it's definitely an opportunity. And I think there's some work being done, and I'm really encouraged by some of the collaboration with European organizations. So I think that's the way forward. I don't think AI tools are going away. They are there. They're efficient. They are actually creating new opportunities for accountability, for transparency, and also doing a lot of reporting on social media content that provides a lot of different types of stories, which is not possible with just one human journalist doing it. So I definitely see a potential and opportunities to create new tools that are customized to the local culture and ethics there.
Thank you very much. What a hopeful ending. Patricia, if I can ask you the same question.
Yes, I'm optimistic as well. Actually, AI has to help us make better journalism. And Flor just mentioned some very interesting use cases. They are more as this Ojo Público, for sure you know this use case algorithm that is helping investigative journalists to detect, to point out corruption government corruption cases. Others, such as those similar what Florencia was telling about, that algorithms that track and identify news among large document databases. So we already know really interesting use cases that confirm us that AI can help journalism. But again, we have to repeat this to ourselves. It depends on how you use it. But I'm confident that journalism will understand how to use it and always focus in its purpose. And if we don't lose this focus of what journalism is, AI for sure is going to help journalism. We need to collaborate. Again, I go back when Florencia was saying collaboration between media, because this needs inversión, this needs funding. And we cannot rely only on platforms for this funding. So we need more collaboration.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. Yeah. Thank you very much. Flor, the last word. What is the future of AI in the newsroom?
I think that reporters has to be alphabetized on what AI is, to report on AI that could cause damage in our audience and citizens and inhabitants of Argentina, like AI as an object of watchdog, no AI produced by government or corporations. And then there is the other AI that could be part of the reporting process or the process of the business side, or so like AI is here to stay, and there are like different focuses that we can develop, and not only to optimize the resources of a struggling newsroom in what have to be the subscriptions or how we make money to do this, but also we have to have a role in raising the voice of how governments and corporations are using AIs that can cause damage to our constitutional rights. No,
absolutely.
But and I'm neutral. Like it's and regarding if it could have lots of good impact in the newsroom, but it's a tool. So we have to know that it's stats. Stats has a margin of error, how we're going to deal with that margin of error. And it's new, and it's going to stay. It's like when first the reporters made interview person to person, and then we have the telephone. But it's also an interview if I telephone or so AI is a new tool, a new technology to help us with the reporting process, but we are all going have to combine it with like leather shoe journalism or talking to other sources and to question the results of AI in our process, and maybe make a disclosure if it's a published article that made an accusation. No, how we like, depending of what you are working on is more important how you disclosed the transparency of all the methodology.
Thank you very much. So with these two hopeful and one cautious answers, I'm gonna stop the recording, but please don't go anywhere, because now I'm gonna open the floor for the audience to make questions.